So Christina, would you take it away? Okay.
Okay. I know, Liz, that you had sent a bunch of questions, so I didn't know if we were wanting to start with the pieces we wanted to share, or if we wanted to ask some questions first, so I kind of know what to emphasize or what to. I mean, I'm going to talk about my piece, obviously, but you know what to bring out in my talk. So I didn't know if anybody had any overarching questions that maybe I can address as I'm going through my piece.
That's a good idea. Speak up, everybody.
One of the questions in my mind is like the interplay between practicality of performance and orchestration. And, you know, the desire for multiplicity of instruments versus, you know, concern about getting performances.
You know, that's a key thing. One of the things that I have found, and I'll when I go through my piece, is my thesis for my master's degree was a percussion quartet, and I had never written for percussion, and I actually got pretty good at it. So almost all my pieces, some orchestras, oh, they only want timpani and 2 other percussionists, and I'm like, you can't have a piece with only 2 percussionists. So sometimes I get limited by the fact that I want a little bit more percussion than some of the others. So that's one of those practicality that I personally run into, is because I want a little bit more percussion than some orchestras want to do.
Yeah, even a vibraphone is excellent.
Oh yeah. I consider a vibraphone and a marimba a you know, a tonal instrument, just like, you know, a bassoon or, you know,
totally. No other sound like it.
So yeah, if you can't include those, I mean, then you can't. If you include those, then you can't have drums, or if you have drums, you can't include those. So anyway, that's the first thing about practicality. And then the other thing is, most people, and some of you I don't know, but I would consider myself a pretty accessible composer. I want people to have a good time performing the work. I want people to engage doing the work. I'm not like Bernie Howe, which you know, every complexity you could possibly do that stretches the capability of the performer. I just don't think that makes for a great performance or an engaging experience for the audience. And so, you know, I write mostly for like level 5, which can be, you know, junior college, community, or, you know, a regular orchestra. I mean, with rehearsal times being for orchestras so limited, if you make it too complex, then you're not going to get those performances, and that's a very, very practical choice. So how do I make it engaging? And then sometimes you can do some things to make it sound more complex, but be less complex on the page. And then so some of those things I try to do. So what I'm going to do is, we were talking about hiccups with Zoom or whatever. One of my hiccups is I have all my finale on my laptop, but my laptop seems to not want to do, again, maybe there's a Zoom update, but I can't share my screen on. So I have just a sound file, and then I have my score. We're going to try this simultaneous thing here, since I don't have my finale file on this computer, but I think at least it can share. So do you have it where Liz or whoever set this up, so you have multiple shares already set up?
I think just share the screen, and then everybody can. Okay, right, Evan.
Let me get it. Share. Okay. So this is my piece, Time After All. This is recently finished in this summer, and it's about being faced with a health issue in your family, and then realizing that you actually probably have more time because you haven't gotten this major disease. So that's what this is about. I looked up where this disease happens most often, and it's in some of the northern countries, US, Canada, Great Britain, and the Nordic countries, and the Netherlands. So therefore I've included program notes in Swedish, Dutch, and French. A friend of mine has said, oh, I can do it in Spanish because in northern Spain, there's quite a bit of incidence in this. So that's coming on board. So can you see this adequately? I mean, or should I just make it a little bigger and then you might?
Yeah, if you can make it bigger. I opened it and I had a way to enlarge it right away.
Yeah, I've enlarged it. I just want you to be able to see most of it. I think I've got it right here where you can see most of the piece.
Oh, I just clicked on view on yours and it came up closer so that I could see better. Has anyone else tried that?
Yeah, you can, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, Christina, if you grab the lower right corner, you should be able to drag that, and that would make that window a little bigger. And maybe you can pick up the the very corner of the window there. Yeah, there you go. Now see if you can pull down.
No, I maxed out top to bottom.
Oh, okay, okay.
So if I want to make it bigger, you lose.
Yeah, it's not gonna. Yeah, okay, I see.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
I maxed out top to bottom, but
yeah, okay.
I'll try to. There'll be places where you miss a little bit, and if you want to go back over everything. So what this piece is about is change over time, and so it starts with some anxiety and it ends with hope. So it just has different facets. So I'm going to go ahead and start playing it from one source and looking at it from another. So hopefully this works out. And it's 7.5 minutes. So. I'll turn.
Did you share the sound?
Oh no, wait a minute. Let me see how to share. Share. Do I have to put like original sound or something?
Well, yes, that should be turned on, and there should be someplace where when you do the share, there should be a little thing that you can check says.
I see.
Yeah, you have to go out, come back. Yeah.
I'm getting.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if this works. You hearing it?
No.
An echo.
You have to go out of the chair. So and then go back in. And down on the left.
Okay, I share sound, but it's still reverberating.
I think that has to do with the microphone.
It's in the share.
I see the sound.
I think everyone should.
You're muted.
You're muted now.
Yeah. Christina, you're muted.
Just start the share screen again, and down in the left-hand corner, there's a thing that says share sound.
Okay, I should be unmuted and I have shared sound. Can you hear? Okay, you ready?
Yeah, hit your play and
Okay.
uh,
The end.
Hey.
Okay.
It was beautiful.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
very nice. Very nice.
Thank you. So what questions do you have? Uh-oh. I think I have to stop the sound. Okay.
I'd be happy to ask a question, but there's the echo.
If you're not talking, mute.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Oh, it
Yeah.
works.
There it goes.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, really lovely piece. I thought the clarity of your musical ideas and the orchestration seemed really compatible, and it was just very it just made sense. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. I guess I have two threads of questions, and I was curious if you both would talk about them. You know, one is more orchestration, compositional question, and one is more like practical, promotional kind of question. I guess on the compositional aspect, I'm wondering if it sounds like you've written a lot more orchestral music than I have, but do you tend to, when you first get started writing for orchestra, do you dive right in, you know, to a full score? Do you do like a double piano, like forehand, you know, 2 piano kind of arrangement first, and then jot down instrumentation as a guide, or how do you work with that? And so that'd be like one question. And because when the one, so basically I've have limited experience. I've written 2 orchestral pieces. They've both gotten performed in a limited way, and they've both been finally recorded well and professionally recently. And I'm just, if you have any advice for somebody who's written a lot of music but not had a whole lot of success in terms of the orchestral realm, and wants to, you know, one, maybe try to get those pieces out there more somehow, and 2, maybe try to get the opportunity to write another orchestra piece down the road, if you have any words of wisdom as far as connecting and blah blah blah. That might be a whole nother seminar, but so thanks. Those are the 2 burning questions.
Maybe Michael and I can both answer these, because his answer might be very different. I'm primarily a vocalist. I'm trained as a vocalist. And I play piano passively, not as well as you, Paul, but I can get by. But piano and singing are my first, you know, instruments. So I found it very difficult when starting orchestra pieces, because I could hear the whole thing in my head, but trying to figure out, okay, what's the clarinet do? What's the French horn do? What's, you know, how do I get it out there to get the whole sound? But how does it blend together to get that sound? And I wrote my first orchestra piece in 2016, which I modified in 2019. And it's just, I've been putting a lot of emphasis the last 5 years on orchestra and wind band, and to really just study, score study, and to try to just teach myself how, okay, they did this way, or so and so did it that way. And you know, Mahler is great, right? My first piece, the orchestration, was based on how Mahler did his string writing. And so lately I've been really listening primarily to just 21st century composers. I've been really looking for orchestration to say, okay, what is Salonen doing? What is John Mackey doing? What is, you know, Viet Quang doing? You know, and really looking at those blendings and how they make those work. And I've been listening to a lot, and depending on what piece I'm working on, because I have the whole thing in my head, how I want it to sound, but I'm like studying different composers' scores to say, well, how do I get there? Whereas my 12-year-old can come up with a band piece and says, okay, here's what the flutes are doing, here's what the clarinets are doing, here's what the trumpets are doing, and the saxophones, and she's got it all in her head and what each person is doing. You know, that's taking me a lot of time to where I'm just starting to be able to do that.
But when you're working out musical ideas for the piece, do you, practically speaking, at least initially, do you go straight to something of a full score, or do you?
No, it's a short
go-
score.
Yeah.
It's what I call a short score. So I have the piano, I have the piano, here's my harmony, here's my melody, oh, and here's my bass, and I have a percussion line, and then I may have a secondary melody. So probably about 5 staves. And then I work it through, and then I kind of explode it from there. So this piece, I wrote the piece all in piano score with a bass and percussion in about 3 weeks. But it took me 3 months to do the orchestration because I knew what the piece was. I knew how I wanted it to go. And of course, you make adjustments or you change your mind or whatever. So I probably adjusted half of it as I was doing the orchestration. But I start with a short score, okay, here's my melodies. And even John Williams, he'll have winds, brass, strings.
Yeah.
And
That's what I did for my first one.
And so some people can totally hear exactly what they want, what instrument to be, and it's completely vertical. They do it all at once, and I can't. I'll do part of it, and then I'll start fleshing it out, and then I'll say, oh, okay, well, here I have this in my higher register. Let me do it in lower register. Okay, how do I want to change my harmony? I look at my harmonic content, and so how do I want that to change over time? And that helps the orchestration tremendously, because what I want that sound to be. Oh, I want this edgier. Because again, at the beginning, I had a technique, it's called chop notation at the very beginning, where we're hitting the strings, not with the back, but with the top. And we're really hitting the strings and creating that agitated feel. And with that, the timpani going, that kind of groan at the beginning, because it's very anxious and very depressing, and then it gets happier. And so and then when you got that French horn solo, you get that clarity that things have changed and things are now hopeful. So I try in my orchestration for it to carry the emotional content as well. So it's a process. I don't orchestrate easily. It is a struggle. But I'm getting better. My first orchestra piece took me like 1.5 years to do. The next one took me about 8 months. The next one took me 6 months, and this one took about 3.5 months. So I'm getting better, but I'm getting stronger and knowing, intuitively, okay, this is what I want to do. But I probably spend a week 5, 6, 7 hours in score study and listening every week. So
thanks for that advice. I appreciate it.
It's very helpful. But I've been really focusing on 21st century, things in the last.
No, I think that's smart.
years.
Yeah. And then there's the promotional, getting it actually performed is a whole nother can of worms. Maybe that should be for down or for later in the
let's do
presentation.
it after Michael's.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear his thoughts on that too.
Sure. So I'm very similar, I think, Christina, in terms of the process of Paul's question had to do with coming up with the short score, working with full score. And I actually don't know. It would be interesting to see if there's anyone here that goes right to full score, starts with the full score. I will say one of my instructors, Fred Fox, I don't know if that's a familiar name to anyone, but who taught at Indiana University for many years, since passed. But he advocated going to full score at a certain point, certainly not at the beginning, but when you get enough into a piece that your ideas really need to take the final kind of clothing, and it's just maybe there's a point where at which it becomes more easy to manipulate your ideas in the actual, so to speak, clothing that they're going to have in the final version of the piece. But I do think writing for any large ensemble, orchestra being one of them, it's so laborious. and you want to make your process as efficient as possible. And I think we've all had that experience if you've worked with large ensembles, turning a page and okay, there's another 3 measures, here's another 4 measures, and you've got this big vertical, space that you're looking through, and say who's doing, marimba's doing what here, and clarinet's doing what, and when you're still composing the piece, that can be, I think it's very easy for that to lead to inefficiency, and just it's frustrating, and it's it can kind of halt the creative impulse if you're not very careful about the way you do it. So yeah, I like working from a short score, whether it's a 4 or 5 stav or something around that that size. So that was the first question. I guess what was the follow up to that?
I guess any small words of wisdom in order to get performances and or make connection with orchestra.
Right. Well, I was thinking about this beforehand. I think that was one of the possible questions that Liz had asked, and I think certainly I think they can come from all manner of connections. The standard answers that I think one might hear might be the music director of an orchestra, for example, the conductor. Some say, well, don't go to the conductor, go to the music director. But I think I've seen examples of people making connections that lead to orchestra performances, both through those kinds of connections, or maybe through getting a performer who champions your music and then presents it to someone else. And so I think, calls for scores. I mean, these are things that can also lead to performances. I think sometimes thinking on these, should we say, call it the smaller end, like the community orchestras and so forth, as opposed to let's send this piece to the New York Philharmonic, just thinking about opportunities that are, say, local conductors, performers that are looking for music, and especially those that champion new music. They sometimes they're quite vocal about that, And so even though I think it can seem like a really forbidding landscape, I think there are a lot of conductors, a lot of performers out there who want to program new pieces, and of course then there are thematic concepts and interests that I'm always impressed actually by composers who are able to kind of fashion various opportunities. I mean, actually, the thinking about your piece, Christina, and thinking about the programmatic aspect of it is kind of an example of this. I'm not sure if it led to it being performed, but just there's this idea that there's some extra musical, issue or concern or topic that is that a group of people might be interested in, and that might lead to, hey, let's do a performance, and let's have a commission, let's get a living composer to do some kind of a musical reflection on this. So I don't know, I just think all of the above, I think we're
all in the same boat. There's no magic formula.
There's no magic formula. Keeping your ears and your eyes open. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm going to add to that. I've checked my sound, and I'm back to my regular speakers. I don't know why I'm echoing. But one of the things I've done with this speaking is, I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of that thing, is find orchestras who might be interested in this programmatic type of piece. For instance, orchestras with populations that have a high incidence of, it's Alzheimer's, high incidence of Alzheimer's and dementia, and there are those, and so I'm tailoring it. I got 30 orchestras that I'm basically cold calling, and I've let them know what this is about, and that they have historic populations, or where in this country. The Mid-Atlantic is a key place in this country that's the highest rate of Alzheimer's in the country. So I'm keying some, New Jersey and Maryland and some of those orchestras and smaller orchestras. To your point, Michael, the Philadelphia Orchestra is not going to blink at me. So, I mean, but a smaller community in, I think it's Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. I'm going to try. They have a nice orchestra, but they're outside of Philly, more community orchestra based. And so I've been pitching this to see what happens. And if nothing else, someone else sees you and says, "Oh, I've heard of that person," or "I think they sent me a score." I mean, if nothing else, then down the road, they might remember your name. I don't know. I haven't gotten anything yet.
When you do that, Christina, how do you do it? Do you send them a score, or do you ask them?
No, I send a very tailored letter. So my letter and it's short, like 150 words. So it's short. And I said, in looking at your orchestra, I see this is your mission and values. Always check the mission and values and of your organization. And I wanted to make you aware of a piece that you might engage your audience. And so I mentioned in the Mid-Atlantic states that it's the highest incidence of Mid-Atlantic and Florida, highest incidence of Alzheimer's in this country. And then so I connect it to their audience. And then for the people I've sent it in Minnesota and the Pacific Northwest, I've mentioned you have these populations, they're historically high, and I'm trying to connect it to their audiences. And I'm not bothering with people in Texas, because, that's not where this would be meaningful. And so, or as meaningful. And so I'm really trying to do that. And the last time I did it, I got, out of 25, I got 5 responses, and 2 people said they would keep it in mind for future. And so I haven't gotten any responses because I just finished this last week. But if I get 4 or 5 responses and say, "Thank you for sending it to me," maybe one will end up doing it someday. But I think that's really not bad odds considering, orchestral performances, new music, so. But this is one I just had to write, I was gonna write it whether there was anyone who wanted to play it or not. So.
Could I mention, I could put this in the chat, but I think it's easier to explain it in 30 seconds. I happen to know of an interesting submission right now for orchestra. Would it be okay to take a few seconds? And for those of you, I guess I get the 2 newsletters, SCI and then American Composers, so maybe you know this, but it's a little peculiar. It's called the Second Performance Project. It's for an orchestra in Montana. And it's, if you've written for orchestra, within the last 10 years, and I don't remember the exact thing, if it's 2013 or 2014, but the interesting hitch to this is it can only have been performed once. So your piece must have been performed once, but if it hasn't been performed again, you can submit. And it's called Second Performance Project. It's Great Falls Symphony. And the man, I can put some of that information in the chat. I just want to say that I did this last year, and they were kind enough to let me know that it had gone to their, whatever you call it, the final selection, but it did not become the piece that was chosen. But what was interesting was that Grant Harville, who is their conductor, said that they do have a database that they then keep of all of these finalists. He was this really nice guy, really cordial guy. So I recommend that. It's such a funny thing, because for me, I happen to have done something that was exactly 10 years ago, and it was just in on the timeline. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Well, Michael, we're dying to hear your piece now.
Michael, it's yours.
So, can you, okay, I think you can all hear me now, right? Yeah, so one of the questions that Liz had asked about was, would you like to present or analyze an existing work? So my piece is not my original piece, but I have a piece by the composer Alberto Ginastera, which I wanted to share with you. And I think it's an interesting piece in terms of writing for orchestra, in that it does a lot of things that are fascinating to me in terms of orchestration and just in terms of orchestral composition in general. So what I wanted to do was maybe start with just looking at the score, which I have kind of made into separate pages on a PowerPoint file here. And then maybe if we have time to listen to it twice, it's about 4.5 minutes. This piece is called Panambi. I don't know if anyone knows it. One of the reasons I thought it would actually be neat to look at too, because it is not as well known as some others, other Ginastera pieces like Estancia or Bomarzo. But give me a second just to share my screen and we'll take a look at this. Okay. Okay, are you all seeing the, just to check the Panambi score file?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Make this as big as possible, and maybe we'll do this. Better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now all I have to do is move your faces out of the way so I can okay, see this. Just I'll just give a little bit of background. This won't be an incredibly detailed presentation, but I thought it'd be nice to give a little bit of background and then get into various aspects of the writing and some of the orchestrational details. So the piece is called Panambi. It's a subtitled Choreographic Legend in One Act. And it comes from this tribal legend relating to pre-Columbian Guarani culture. The Guarani people are a group of indigenous people in South Central South America. There's a little bit of a program to it. And it's often spoken about as a ballet. But so here's a little quote from gramophone.com. The plot concerns the love of Guirahu for the chief's daughter, Panambi, and the machinations of the local sorcerer who also desires her. A battle between good and evil plays out across a single night, opening with wonderful impressionistic moonlight and ending with a radiant hymn to the dawn. In between, the expertly scored music is largely restrained, though with some electrifying episodes along the way. It's also, when you read about this piece, you'll see that there's some seem to be pretty clear formative influences on Ginastera, particularly if you think of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring or Debussy's Afternoon of a Faun. There's some Ravel that you might hear as well. So this first part here, there's a little notation if you can read it. It's well, first of all, it says the moonlight on the Paraná, which is the Paraná is the river that on which this kind of narrative near which it takes place, and the idea is that there's the moonlight shining on the river Paraná. And then if you see the tiny little letters there, you'll see La Noche, the night. And let's see here. I have to be able to manipulate this here. There we go. So it opens with these two bassoons, contrabassoon and bassoon. Very interesting, very lugubrious sound. And actually what I'll do is I'm sitting at a keyboard, and if my sound isn't too terrible, maybe you can you hear that? So it continues along. You hear those parallel perfect fifths, the forbidden fruit there. And it's this very, I think, just lugubrious or I think there's something, I don't know, I kind of hear the night atmosphere come through in that. Opens with this, and then we get, here we go, here's the next page. To that texture, we get added the clarinets. There's a little bit of a change of tonality. We were in this kind of B-based, B with just a fifth above it. It wasn't B minor, it wasn't B major, just this kind of B with a fifth above it. Changes to an A, with the clarinets coming in. Again, very kind of much this perfect fifth power chord, if you will, kind of sonority. But then what he does is he starts to not just move in parallel, but there's some contrary motion. And out of that arises some interesting dissonances. So you get seconds, minor seconds, perfect fifths. And you'll hear that kind of rise in tension during the clarinets passage there. Then you also get, and by the way, the strings are muted here, pianissimo, but the tremolo string texture kind of starts this next section where we get increasingly chromatic lines here in harmony. And a lot of it you'll find throughout this whole movement is built on fifths. There's a lot of pentatonic kind of structures as well, which of course you can build the pentatonic scale if you stack fifths. And in fact, if you can see, it's very small on my screen, but if you look at right before rehearsal 2, you still have the perfect fifths in the contrabass and then the cello above it. And then if you notice, all the strings successively build fifths. So those all are heard together, so you get this big mass. And there's a harp line that comes out against that, which is even dissonant against that. And then, so that kind of leads us to rehearsal 2. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the way orchestration is used to highlight structure or to clarify form, to clarify mood, and so forth. Here, if you look at, if you can see the small score here, you'll see that the stacked fifths are now arranged in a very consonant way. So you'll see D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp. And then above that, you get the same D, A in the flutes a few octaves higher. So you might recognize that motive from the beginning. And in the lower parts, you get, try it again. It's just playing the contrabass parts there. But so again, you're getting this not just parallel motion, but contrary motion, chromaticism, and you get the entrance of the harp, which, if we're trying to get a sense of what the tonality is here, it's a little tricky when you first look at that. You say, well, are we in D? If we're in D, you can kind of get the sense of D through those stacked fifths, D major, but then there are these chromatic lines above it, and then the harp has A, D, E flat, B flat, right? Against this, and then this, and there's even more actually if I play all the flutes. Trying to get all of that in there, right? So there's a little bit of ambiguity, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at with it. So even though you get these stacked fifths and these clear implications for, say, D major, it's a little bit more involved than that. So if you look at rehearsal 3, again, there's another orchestrational change here. We get muted trumpets on this kind of interesting little interjection. And again, and we also get the some of the first really what I think of as oscillating gestures. They'd come in a couple of measures before, but you see in the clarinets a little bit before 3, and trading off these oscillating gestures too, which by the way, I think of as a really handy thing to be able to do. We were talking about practicality in writing for orchestra, and particularly if you're writing for winds and you have a lot of constant oscillating or gestures or repeating gestures, ostinati, they do need to breathe, right? And it's also, it just adds a certain amount of variety and of texture to your scoring. So, but at 3, you get, in addition to the oscillations that you see in the clarinets, as you still have the harp line on 16ths, you get a oboe figure, the whole, not the whole double reed family, but 2 oboes, English horn, coming in with a gesture that now is actually clarifying a new key, which is F major. So they have something like this. Eventually we're going to get in the cello. And so already we're starting to see the beginning of a pattern, which is just, it's just kind of a nifty arrangement. Well, the beginning we had this B, the melody was the kind of this B basis, and then moved down to A. So far, it's hard to get much of a sense of a real pattern, but eventually what we're going to see is rising thirds. So each of these sections is going to be loosely based around some kind of a tonal focus. So we had rehearsal 2 was D, then we moved to F, we're going to next move to A flat, then to C, then to E, then to G, then to B flat, all the way up, and finally he starts moving by 4th or 5th, depending on how you look at it, to F, and finally the movement ends in C. So just a little heads up about what's happening there. But if you think of it in those terms, for me it's really interesting to think about what does he do. I call them the kind of friction elements. What does he do in terms of providing these elements that go against the grain of the harmony, of the basis, let's call it the basic tonality. And so here, you'll see these, by the way, I could not get a good translation for the word HUN, rays of the, I thought maybe it might be sun, but if there's someone who has an idea of what that might mean, the rays, I think the rays shining on the river, if you look at the bottom of, right after rehearsal 3 in the strings. So it's a very chromatic, kind of a cluster gesture. Each string part has a first inversion triad melodically, but the whole thing is it's like a big cluster. And then we see, again, if you can, if your eyes are this good, you can see these kind of. There's an F sharp that provides that friction against F major. I'm going to get us to the next page here and take a look at what's happening here. If you're looking at page 4, you can see there's clearly this perfect fifth kind of idea again. Right, so there's that strong perfect fifth foundation. And then we start to, eventually we're going to add more levels of this oscillation. So we have 16ths in the harp. We have triplet eighths in the clarinets. We have triplet quarters in the bassoons, playing the same line that the cello and contrabass are. We have these kind of pentatonic-y gestures up in the 2 flutes. We have the oboe melody that I mentioned earlier. And then if we look at page 5, you'll see even more. So I think I counted maybe 4 different kind of repetitive rhythmic layers here. And that's one thing that's just neat about this piece, the layering that happens. 16ths in the flute, we have triplet eighths in the clarinet, we have, again, the 16ths in the harp. Piano right hand, piano left hand is 30 seconds. Then we have sextuplets in violin 2 and viola. So, and then some gestures which we'll hear a number of times. Looking at page 6 here. So a lot of these same strands are still in play, and you'll see these some percussion enters the picture here. Claves, there's a tambourine, I think. There's xylophone, and there's a notation in the score at some point here that talks about the rumors of the night, or excuse me, rumors of the jungle. And I thought that's a neat thing to have in mind while you listen to those percussion little interjections. If you're picturing the river, the Paraná River, as being this kind of oscillating, flowing texture, then you get these neat little sparkly gestures that are then interwoven in that. Should be, I guess, in your right hand side, page 7. You might be able to read, it says Canto del Paraná, the song of the Paraná. And that's very prominent in the texture. It's scored forte for 4 horns. They're given the instruction cantando, as singing lyrical. And you'll see that there's, again, quite a bit of figuration going on here. You may be able to see that the tonality has been shifting. We moved from F to A flat in the previous page, then now C. And then if you look at the cello part in particular, you can see these perfect fifths keep continuing. And so we're adding layers, but there's still the presence of things we've heard before. There's a trumpet line. This is kind of these 2 chords that get heard right next to each other. And we've heard that before. That continues. We have, triplet eighths. We have all of those other layers that we had earlier in terms of the rhythmic strata. And let's look at the next one. Page 8. Again, pretty close to 2D here. Pretty much everyone playing. Interesting tonally in that if you look at the low strings, or pretty much all the strings here, it's all white note harmony. You get a lot, again, the stacked fifth texture. There's a pentatonic aspect of it, if you want to think of it that way. C, written for 5-string bass, by the way, which is kind of interesting too. Sounding here, and then we get, and in violas we get violins. So it all fits into this kind of C natural bass texture and a pentatonic bass texture. Some of the pitches from those collections are highlighted. If you look at the harps, it has the D, harp 1 has D in different octaves, harp 2 has G in different octaves. But you also get these friction factors, such as the left hand in the piano. I'll play it with the right hand here, just the pitches. Let's see. Those are the 2 collections, basically. Something like that. And this is against the very lyrical, melodic Canto del Paraná, the song of the river that you hear in the horns. Let's see. I think I just jumped a page ahead here. I want to make sure I'm going the right direction. There we go. So this continues, and you'll see it's a pretty thick texture here. And C is the prevailing harmony, kind of the basic harmony. And eventually thinning out. If we look at rehearsal 6, I guess you can see my cursor, yes? Mm-hmm. So you'll see here that we have, I think it feels there's a certain, like it's a certain uplift in terms of the mood, that this motion up a major third, the tonality moving from C to E. And it's really just kind of a, there's not a lot of transition involved. We go from here, and these kinds of harmonies, to this. So So there's this kind of, I don't know, I feel kind of an uplift, and it feels a little simpler. It certainly is texturally a little simpler there when we get to that, but essentially transposition of that basic idea. This is if you see the notation at the top of page 11, the rumors of the jungle, and you'll hear that. You could imagine are these, creatures, or flecks of sunlight. It's up to us to imagine, I suppose, what might be happening, or if you really wanted to delve into the narrative, there it talks about this battle between good and evil and so forth. So you could think about that as well. Let's just jump to next rehearsal letter here. Yeah, so we've eventually moved up from, if you look at the very bottom of the page, G as your basic tonal center, to B flat. There's kind of a B flat major-ish quality that you'll see happening here. And then finally it moves by root motion of something other than a third. And you'll see at rehearsal 8, this is the Song of the Parana, but now in the strings, muted strings, with this kind of voicing, which we see a lot of. So we saw that in the horns earlier. Now we're kind of setting up for a return to, I guess, yeah, it's a return to C. It's it's going to be the final tonal area of emphasis. And it's interesting in doing that at rehearsal 9, you'll still see the Song of the Parana. If you look at the horns, dee da da dee da da dee da 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 dee. You'll see that happening in the key of C. I'm transposing the horn part down a fifth there. And you'll see in the bass that we have a melody that we recognize. Similar to the opening, except that at the beginning we had this tritone. Now it's kind of, I'm sorry, no, it is a tritone here, but it's really setting up this major C major key now as a root. And the interesting thing too is what else happens around that. If you look at rehearsal 9. More oscillations, not as much as we had earlier, though, right? So I think there's kind of a setting up of a sort of a resolution and a little bit of a settling texturally and so forth. You'll see there's more percussion here, kind of commentary. A lot of these percussion lines and the piano lines skate around the important harmonic tone. I shouldn't say, well, the fundamental harmonic tones, right? So, for example, page 12, we have a prevailing harmony, kind of G major. But then against that, you have piano lines that are like this. I'm trying to read small note heads here, but if I'm getting that right there. There we go. And you'll see a number of these kind of, again, these kind of friction factor type gestures, as I'm calling them. Finally, we're going to end up in this B flat territory. Those gestures continue, and then we come to page 14 where we have the song we just talked about. Let me make sure I'm going the right direction. Here's the last page of the piece. And so this is where things kind of really settle on C major. You'll notice that it's in the strings, they have a very kind of full chord. And then we have harmonics. It's a little hard to see, but he actually has harmonics that are going to sound here and there. So it's a C major chord, but with two B's sounding fairly high in the range. And then there's this lovely harp gesture and harmonics, harmonics played by the harp. Those pitches, and that's the movement. So it's a quick tour of the movement that I thought I'd hopefully shed some light on it, and then we could listen, and then maybe if there are questions, we could do that. So now let me see. Now I need to stop this share and give me a second and find. Let's see. Okay, no, not that. Hold on. Okay, so I won't attempt to manipulate those slides and play this, but this is a YouTube file that does have a score, so you'll be able to get a general sense of the score here. 1 second. Share sound, and here we go. Everyone have that? Okay, oops, sorry. Hold it. Hold on a second. Stop that. Okay. Didn't mean to go on to the next movement there.
Second movement, looking fade there.
Lots of fire and activity, that second one. So yeah, it's just a, you know, this is it's interesting. I was actually looking at some other music as one tends to do. Christina was talking about score study, and I do a lot of the same things. I spend a lot of time studying scores, whether orchestra or not. But these days there's so much you can find. This one was tough to find a hard copy of. I looked at libraries around town and so forth, but just the stuff you can find online, and it just struck me as a nice little chunk, a 4.5 minute piece to that maybe not too many are familiar with. I mean, it's included on a lot of recordings of, say, Estancia, but another curious thing about it is it's marked Opus 1. Written 1934 to 1937, but apparently Ginastera really withdrew a lot of earlier pieces, took them out of his catalog, so this ends up being the Opus 1. But even though some might not put it in the category of some of his later works, I think there's a lot to be said for it. And again, this idea of this layering and also consistent. Use of consistent materials, but with a lot of really interesting variety, and in concert with this whole narrative. I just find it to be a really colorful piece. So I don't know if there are questions. I know it was moving pretty quickly, and I don't know if you could see much of the score there, but yeah.
So I have one question.
How much in this score?
If everybody else can mute, that would be great. I have a general question about percussion scoring, and I noticed that if I read everything right, in Christina's score, she had a single stave with different percussion instruments on each line, and my assumption was that would be one player. In this score, there were 3 or 4 different, also 5 line staves for, I presume, different players. But I also see one line for one instrument. And I'm just wondering, is there any standard to this, or is it just, the composer just figures out what they want to do and they communicate something?
Yeah, so in this piece, I just had to check that it's written for 5 players. It was interesting because I was just teaching an orchestration class earlier today. We were talking about how to consolidate percussion parts. My students are writing for, a couple of players, but each player will play a few different instruments. And so the idea is to recognize when it's more practical to consolidate and when it actually might make more sense to actually have separate parts. But yeah, I think the story with this one is really that you need 5 different players and they each get their own staffs. I can't, yeah, I'm sure it sounds as if you had a more of a consolidated score, Christina. Is that right? Or
Yeah, it's a little different than the printed score, I think, Michael.
Mine was pretty much the same. I had the separate, each staff was for a different player.
Oh,
But
okay.
I have drums on one staff, metals on another staff, etc. And then sometimes I'll shift maybe vibraphone and chimes or something. And I don't know. I'm so sorry.
I had a question. Oh, no. Sounds like it's the echo. I won't do it then. Is that tolerable?
Yes, now we can
Oh,
hear.
okay. So I'm thinking of in the area of pragmatism. If we were writing for orchestra and considering the economics of orchestras these days and whether orchestras are getting good audiences and paying for everything, would you necessarily even choose 2 harps? I mean, I know it's not so esoteric, it's not so out there, but is it that kind of in consideration? How much do any of you think about that? Or would you for your next orchestral piece?
Well, maybe. Oh, Oh, okay. I was just gonna offer that it is interesting. I don't have a piece with two harps in it that I'm looking to have performed, but I am. Again, this class I'm teaching, we have students in December doing a reading. So 6 of them will have full orchestra, so smaller orchestra pieces read, and getting one harpist. I mean, we have a great harpist on our faculty, Jennifer Craig, but she's not available that night. And she's been working really hard to find a second harpist anywhere in town, that can do it. And I can only imagine, maybe others can speak to this, that that it might be a tricky thing. But of course, there are orchestras who, I just don't know, in terms of, say, the Oregon Symphony. I mean, most of the performances I see there are, she's the only harpist. I don't know, maybe others have thoughts about that.
If I can venture, I don't know, I'm getting an echo here from, okay. That, the trade-off is what you want musically and what the practical situation is. But the thing is, if you hear two harps and you write material that requires two harps, you got to use two harps. I think that's it. Richard Strauss, for example, or a lot of his pieces require two harps, and many others. It really depends on the nature of your harp writing. If you can figure out a way to do it on one harp, then of course you can do that. But sometimes it's not possible, or if you want, two different harp effects at the same time, then two harps is a logical choice. And harpists really, I've had the good experience of working with some excellent harpists over many years. And the thing is, if you get a harpist that really knows their stuff, you really can write very chromatic music and not have to worry about it. You do need to think about it, and you may want to consult with a harpist to see how they see it, and they can make some good suggestions, for pedal changes. But harpists can really do some incredible things today, and there's a whole generation of harpists out there that now have been trained to do all the special techniques and to handle very complex music. So I know it doesn't really answer your question, Mary, but that's the trade-off. And the thing is, if you're going to write for a specific orchestra, I mean, if you're in that situation, then of course you got to write to the situation, and then that becomes your challenge as a composer. But if you're just writing for what you want to write, you gotta write what you write.
And just to pick up along what you're saying there, Greg, I think this particular piece that we were listening to, the Hinastera, one of the things I really enjoyed about it was you look at the harp parts, and they're doing very different things. One is focusing on glisses, and one is focusing on little chromatic gestures. So it's definitely the kind of piece that couldn't have been written the way it is, taking out one of those harps.
Yeah. I think you need to think of it as, if you need two clarinets, you need two clarinets. It's two of the same voice, but one can be doing harmonics and one can be doing figurative work, and that's quite a nice effect. And I think you'll find that in a number of works over the years. If I can just back up, both of you have made good points about composers to study and to analyze, like what Michael just did. But I would like to suggest that some good composers for orchestration is to go clear back to Berlioz, number one, because he did some very interesting things for his time. And then coming forward a little bit, then certainly Ravel, Respighi, Richard Strauss. That's not everyone's cup of tea, but he knows how to do it. And then you can come. There are certainly many other fine composers, but the thing is that Respighi and Ravel are very good if you want to know how to do textural things, the things that they can do to give you the illusion of something, and how they accomplish that through multi-layers of different instruments doing different things. But when you hear the whole thing, it creates this incredible blanket or background against which other things occur. And you have to really learn how to do that and learn the subtleties of what you can do with strings, and particularly with strings and percussion. And oh, and one other thought on percussion. I had a percussionist many years ago that said, use a 5-lane staff, put the metal on the lines and the skins on the on the spaces, and to set up a chart at the very beginning of your score for that, and but at the same time, you sometimes, if you have a lot of instruments and have more instruments than you have all those lines and spaces, then of course you have to indicate in the score, where you've got to change, and you've got to allow time to change. But I found that most percussionists prefer that to, say, a 1-line score, and stuff above and below it. They still rather see a 5-line staff. So, for what it's worth.
I just wanted to put another plug in. Actually, it's interesting. I was actually going to present on a Ravel piece, and then I thought, let's do something a little different. But Ravel, yeah, just what a great orchestrator, and he's another great composer to look at. You can see the original piano for some of these pieces that we think of as having, in the orchestral form. Some of them existed as piano pieces, and it seems almost unbelievable that they were piano pieces that turned into these kind of what we might call masterworks. So there's that art of like taking something in one medium and translating it to the other and adapting it without changing the spirit. Too much, and really just capturing the essence that I think, Ravel is just, if you look at Daphnis and Chloe, or we could name the Pavane, por Un Infante Funte, there are all kinds of examples, but yeah, absolutely one of the greats.
Yeah, the Mother Goose is another.
Yes.
When I first started studying orchestration, I looked at the piano score for that, and then how he orchestrated, and our pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky. I mean, we all think of the Ravel orchestra piece almost more than we think of Mussorgsky's piano piece, and I've studied that as well, and it's just fabulous. What I really liked, Michael, about the Ginastera piece is we all fall into this trap of hearing the same things over and over and over. And I'm really glad you picked this piece, because one of the things that I've been really working on and trying to get better at is creating these sound worlds. And even though it has that programmatic, story to it, you're immersed in this sound world. And I thought how he did that, and it doesn't look texturally thick on the page, but it just sounds so thick in our ears, and it was just amazing. Thank you for sharing.
I'll tell you another interesting piece to study. I heard just a short while ago, the Berlin Philharmonic on one of their broadcasts is the Shostakovich 4th Symphony. Incredible. It's a very long listen, and the ending of that is just stupendous in the way it's orchestrated, and it's really well worth studying.
I have a quick question on notation, really getting down to some elementary stuff. I noticed in the Ginastera there were a lot of long phrases in every instrument, but then looking at just a little bit of the next movement I didn't see any. One thing that the brass quintet asked me to do was to take out all the phrase markings, and then I made mine atonal because it was. But and I've heard so many winds and strings say they don't want all those phrase markings in. Now Ginastera had them all over the place. So what do you guys, can I get it like some ideas of just what do we do here? Now I'm going to redo my woodwind quintet and take out all the phrases, but do I? As a pianist, I rely on those phrases, but as other musicians, I know that they phrase their music, but how do they phrase it? I've seen orchestration books and of how you're supposed to do this and not supposed to do that as far as phrasing. But what do you guys think? This is a poll for all of us here. Any thoughts?
Are you talking phrases or slurs?
Phrase markings, slurs, long slurs,
No,
not two or three like notes slurred together like a two-note slur or something like that. But even that, they didn't really want that because but long phrase markings, and Gould says not to put them in, and other people say not to put them in. What do you think?
The same symbol means something different for different instruments, especially for strings,
Yeah.
right?
Well, in strings, and I've played violin and I've played cello in just community orchestras, but I think of the phrasings and I follow them because I'm a pianist. But I've been told that string instruments they don't like to see all that because they have to try to get it all in one bow, or a wind instrument have to get it all in one breath.
No.
Yes. What do you say?
You're the composer. You phrase it the way you want it phrased.
But
Because otherwise the musicians will control your music and they're going to phrase
Well,
it the way
that's
they
what
want
I'm
to phrase
thinking
it.
too. So yeah, what do you say, Mary?
yeah, Liz, I was going to sound like I'm a clairvoyant here and say, well, of course you're a pianist, because I could tell from what you're describing, because I'm a pianist too. And we always want to find where that phrase is. And I was just speaking with someone about this today, a cellist. It's really taken me a long time to come around to this, to believe that other musicians, that string players will hear the long phrase that you want without you indicating this phrase over, 8 or 9 or however many notes. The problem is if you put it on one phrase, you're indicating to them that they should do it on one bow arm, and they're going to run out of arm, and it's not going to give you what you want. So I just want to say it's been very hard for me also to try to make this leap. It's not a transition to try to understand what it is for strings and wind, but we really do have to think of it differently. I know there are composers, especially, maybe from another century, who would still keep in the long phrase, but it's not kosher.
And if you don't have the long phrase, would you do that with dynamics, with crescendo, diminuendo? That's what I was doing.
Yeah, or I think you have to rely that hopefully what's intrinsic in your music, it's going to come out. Now that may be a big leap also. But I really have this very conversation.
Yeah. Michael.
Just wanted to add. Well, I think Brian kind of hit the nail on the head too in getting across the point that these, if we're talking about a slur marking, it means something different for different players. And we often talk about phrases. The word phrase. Well, there's the musical unit, and we often might equate that with the symbol that often coincides with the beginning and the end of that phrase, but they're two different things, right? So I'm a wind player, we need to breathe, and I do appreciate not only being given slurs because it gives me a sense of when to breathe, but also because it's a variety of texture. And so I think, as Greg was saying, I mean, the composer really, I think the performers really want the composer to provide that. It's different if you're talking about, I think, for supplying particular specific bowings, up bows and down bows. There, I think you can let the string players make their concertmaster, so forth, make intelligent decisions. If you're doing something kind of off kilter, non-intuitive, then it's a good idea to include those. But yeah, I think when we speak about phrasing, because I know what you're talking about, Liz, in some piano music, we see these long, expansive lines, but if you were to transcribe that for orchestra, to give that to a wind player, they're going to need to change it at some point. So yeah, it's just
or dotted, and I've seen that dotted note.
Yes.
I mean, a dotted line instead of so I tried that. I haven't had any feedback yet on that, but yeah, and I said to these guys, what I mean is shape the phrases. That's what we do as pianists. We shape the phrase, and it makes sense to us. But but when I said that, it kind of made sense to them. So I think what you said, Mary, about the context of the piece of the, it's going to shape itself, maybe. I don't know.
What,
I don't know.
Liz, something might help is that imagine yourself a string player
Oh,
and
yes, I am.
bow.
I
No, really
know.
go through your part and pretend you're a string player playing.
Oh, yeah.
It'll give you a sense, you know, of the bowing that might be needed. For
Yes, but
example.
even as a string player, which I have been in violin and in cello,
Mhm.
that you are bowing with the phrase in mind, so that you're not going to be a sudden down bow or up bow or
Mhm.
uh, so yeah. So I understand that aspect of, but
Mhm.
how to get the whole concept. Yeah, go ahead.
Mine, I just do the slurs because, like, if I want Michael to, I sing all my parts.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So if I wanted to go la, or do I want la 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 la? I'll have the slur on the first one. I won't, but that may not be the whole phrase. And when you have the large ensembles, you have the conductor. And one little thing I try to do, and you can't do it all the time, but I try to do. If you were to look at my page, I have phrases starting usually at the beginning of a page. And so I try to space it so I have these thoughts, these phrases, these ideas covering a certain amount. And then, okay, the next page, I have maybe a new phrase or whatever. And then so when the conductor looks at it, he goes, oh, this is one idea. This is how we're going to do this. And then here's this other idea on the next, starting on the next page. And that's a really simple thing. And you can't do it all the time because it doesn't work. But I try when I can, and that makes it in person's head, in the performer's head, in the conductor's head, saying, I can see where my breaks are. And that's just a little trick that I do.
That makes sense to me, and that's why I would put them in. But then when you get the players saying, I don't.
But I don't put the long lines. I only put the slurs for breathing or for bowing, or how do I want it articulated. But I don't put the long lines at all for phrases.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I wanted to say about this particular piece by Hinastera is that it was so layered, and there were so many different phrases that were overlapping and not aligned. And I think
Right.
in that case, it would be really important to keep a long phrase line might be really appropriate.
Yes, with it, so the breath would, yes, and that I agree.
When I first started writing for strings, I tried to phrase everything because I didn't know any better. And then the players chewed me out, right, for doing it. And so I just challenged myself to use as little slur and phrases as I could. I asked myself, do I really have to do this? And I found that it was easy to get rid of maybe 80% of everything I was writing in slurring for the players. And then if I basically went down to only if I had a relatively short figure, maybe less than a measure, and I really had to have it slurred or phrased in a particular way, would I slur it. And usually it's no more than 5 notes at the most.
Yeah.
That was very good for me. And I don't use, like I said, I use 80% fewer slurs for almost everything now. And I trust that my phrase, if I built my phrase correctly, it should naturally slur and phrase and group together. And if it doesn't fall that way and half the people play it one way and half the people play it the other, I haven't done my job, right? I've done something wrong in how I've written the music because people can't figure out what to do.
Yeah, and I noticed in Hinastera that there were a few places where there was a long phrase mark over just a few notes, just maybe a long held note, and then a couple later in one part. And I thought, why did he put it there?
Just
So
looking through the score, and most of those places are actually places that are indicating breathing. Like they're a long set of alternating notes for the winds, and it's all in one breath, and most of them are actually just performance articulations and not phrasing.
okay. Okay.
I have to jump in here. We're already 8 past
Yes.
9 o'clock.
Oh.
I'm okay with if you want to stay on, but I just want to let those that need to go. And so consensus, do you want to carry on, say, for another maybe 10 minutes, or do you want to say that's it? Because I'm looking for a majority.
I think I
Okay.
need to move on to dinner myself. I see there's some
Yeah, I
other
think
people
it's
needing to
Yeah.
sign off.
This has been wonderful. It's just, I don't know how those echoes get in there. Somebody at one meeting said it was one person that had the microphone in their speaker jack or something, but I don't know what it is. But anyway, thank you so much to Christina and Michael for
Yeah.
putting these together. And yeah, it's just and Alex, I'm so glad. He says, "Can we just do maybe a panel discussion of some?" Yes, that's great, and it worked out. And like I said, David Bernstein, just about every year when I set up the presentations, he says, if you have a spare month or something. But this is the first year where I didn't have people sign up, many times like the year before, and the rest of them were. So by July, I had everybody. I had every month, and this has been just a very different year, and it worked out fine because we've got these two now that November and December that we can do this. So this is wonderful.
So yeah, we get to do this again with Adrian Albert and Teksu Kim. I think Teksu Kim.
Yes. So
It'll be
again,
wonderful too.
different ideas that will come in.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank